There is no doubt that the biblical narrative of the Exodus has become a monumental narrative for major religions around the world, including Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. This narrative has even made its way to pop culture, making the basis for different forms of arts. One of which is the movie The Ten Commandments by Cecil DeMille, starring Charleston Heston as Moses and Yul Brynner as Ramses II. But the question is, did the Exodus really happen? An article written by James K. Hoffmeyer, published by the Biblical Archaeology Society in 2012, prompted some very intriguing insights from other scholars who question or rejects the biblical narrative, stating, there's a lack of corroborating archaeological evidence in Egypt and in Sinai. The Exodus narrative is a myth, a legend, a mere folktale. The narrative was written so many centuries after it happened. Thus, it is theologically and ideologically shaped that they cannot be read as history. And for this very reason, many people, even from those major religions, had become skeptical and unbelieving. My name is Alan Kamba, and in this presentation we will demonstrate that the historicity of the biblical Exodus is supported by many scholars through quantitative methods. We will dig through the different arguments presented in the book Israel's Exodus in Transdisciplinary Perspective, a volume from the Quantitative Methods in the Humanities and Society by Thomas E. Levy. This book is a pioneering work surveying the Exodus narrative in discipline that has never been done before, combining archaeological discovery, quantitative methodology, and close literary reading. This huge volume is a result of a 2013 conference entitled Out of Egypt, which was held at University of California in San Diego on March 31st to June 9, 2013, and it involved more than 40 scholars from the US, Europe, and Israel. We will present from scholars of different disciplines and also their arguments surrounding those theories. Towards the end of our presentation, we will examine the various strengths and weaknesses of those theories and also discuss my take on their arguments. Here are the various theories about the Exodus that we will examine. 1. Theories on the dates of the Exodus. 2. Cultural context theories on the Exodus. And 3. The Terra theories on the Exodus. Let us first look at the chapter Exodus Dates and Theories by Lawrence Garrity, who presented this during the 2013 Out of Egypt Convention. There are many theories on the dates of the Exodus, but due to the time constraints on this presentation, we will only look at 2 of the major dates. First, the traditional date theory, putting the account of the Exodus in around 1450 BCE. According to this theory, in a biblical perspective, 1 Kings 6:1 said, in the 480th year after the Israelites came out of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Zib, the 2nd month, he began to build the temple of the Lord. So, what we have here is a specific amount of years between the time the Israelites came out of Egypt and the time of Solomon's reign. So Solomon's reign plus 480 years equals the date of the Exodus. Scholars suggest that the reign of King Solomon is around 970 BCE, but this is still kind of debatable. Therefore, 970 plus 480 is 1450 BCE. Also in Judges 11:26, the judge Jephthah said, for 300 years Israel occupied Heshbon, Aroer, the surrounding settlements, and all the towns along the Arnon. Why didn't you retake them during that time? Now, we have another date here, but more like a rounded number rather than a specific one. So, doing the math, Jephthah's time plus 300 years plus the years the Israelites wandered in the wilderness equals the date of the Exodus. Scholars suggest the date 1075 for the date of Jephthah. Therefore, 1075 plus 300 plus 40 equals 1415. The year 1415 is close enough considering we had more rounded number of 300 as given by Judge Jephthah. So, in a biblical perspective, using the verses mentioned and the dates suggested by scholars, we have plus or minus 1450 BCE as the date or the traditional date of the Exodus. If calculations for the traditional date theory are correct, the Exodus narrative should correlate with Egyptological accounts. Well, let's see if this makes sense. Granting that the date of the Exodus is around 1450 BCE, following the proposed traditional date, Thutmose I would fit as the pharaoh who issued the death decree. Granting that the date of the Exodus is around 1450 BCE, it would also suggest that Hatshepsut was the pharaoh's daughter who rescued Moses when Thutmose I moved his court to Memphis. The traditional date theory would also suggest that Moses fled Egypt at the end of Hatshepsut's co-regency in Egypt, and she would be the pharaoh mentioned in Exodus 2:23 that had died while Moses was in exile or in Midian. Now let's take a look at the consensual date theory, putting the account of Exodus in around 1250 BCE. According to Garrity's chapter, this is the proposed date by the current consensus among scholars. According to this theory, in a biblical perspective, Exodus 1:11 states, Israelites built the city of Ramses for Pharaoh. This city of Ramses mentioned in the Bible is also linked with the Ramesside capital of Pi-Ramesse at Qantir, which was non-existent during the 18th dynasty. So, this biblical statement seems to negate the traditional theory. If calculations for the consensual date theory are correct, the Exodus narrative should also correlate with Egyptological accounts. Let us see if this theory also makes sense. In most part of Lawrence Garrity's presentation of the consensual date theory, he referred to the geographical study of Professor Manfred Bietak. Professor Bietak's study suggests broadly that the geography and the cultural setting of the Proto-Israelites in Egypt and the likelihood of the Exodus narrative reflects the Ramesside period. We will talk about this more later on. There are other proposed theories on the dates of Exodus, which is ranging from 2100 BC to 650 BC. Now let's look at an Exodus theory in a cultural context perspective. Manfred Bietak, an Austrian archaeologist, presented some great insight at the 2013 Out of Egypt Convention on his excavation of Tel al-Daba, which was said to be the settlement area of the Proto-Israelites. In the study of Manfred Bietak, he has found that the topography or the architectures found from the settlements in the northeastern delta or at Tel al-Daba had distinctive features like 4-room houses, altars, pits for sacrificed animals, and many more. These similar architectural features were later found during the Iron Age in the Judean Hill Country and in the Negev. In addition to that, Bietak gave evidence for the presence of the existence of cultural and ethnical relationship between those who settled in Egypt to the people that settled in the contemporary Israel during the Iron Age. During Bietak's presentation during the Out of Egypt Convention, he noted that those people who lived in the northeastern part of the Delta were highly qualified for various works, such as building ships, crafts, ceramic industry, and scarabs industry, and many more. Therefore, they were certainly not driven out of Egypt. He argues that they are too capable in doing the laborious works in Egypt to be chased out of there. Lastly, let's look at a more scientific and naturalistic explanation of the Exodus using modern techniques. Let's now look at the Thera theories on the Exodus. Thera is an antique city in the Greek island of Santorini in the Aegean Sea. The cataclysmic eruption of Thera occurred around 17th to 16th century, around the time of the Exodus narrative. Can this major catastrophic event be used to explain the turbulent event during the Exodus narrative? Was the 9 plagues a result of a sequence of natural events prior to the eruption? In the 2013 Out of Egypt conference held at the UC San Diego, Mark Harris, a scholar in physics and theology, presented various theories and gave his insight on those theories. Let's look at some of those theories, starting from the oldest to the most recent. In 1969, the book Atlantis, The Truth Behind the Legend by Gallipolis and Bacon, they denoted that the Terra was the decisive spur that allowed the Israelites to escape from Egypt. In 2009, in the book The Parting of the Sea, How Volcanoes, Earthquakes, and Plagues Shaped the Story of Exodus by Barbara Selverson, she said that the natural catastrophe shapes the whole Exodus narrative. In 2012, in the book Terra and the Exodus by Ryan Boyson, suggested that there were multiple Exodus and also multiple Terra eruptions. Mark Harris responded to these theories, saying that there are many other factors beyond the naturalistic to consider interpreting the text, not least human factors. In this same context, Harris also agreed with William Dever, saying scientific explanations of the miracles miss the point. In conclusion, let us now look at some of the strengths and weaknesses of the various theories and positions. On the theories on the dates of the Exodus. Following the datum provided using traditional date theory, it is rather likely that the Exodus happened around plus or minus 1415 as suggested in Judges 11:26 under Jephthah's 300 years statement. How? If it was Thutmose I that issued the death decree around 1500 BCE, and Moses was 40 when he left Egypt, according to Acts 7:23, 1500 minus 40 would give us 1460. Now let us not forget that Moses was in Midian for 40 years, as stated in Acts 7:30, Exodus 3:1, Exodus 4:20, and Exodus 7:7. 1460 minus 40 would give us 1420. 1420 is well within the threshold of 1415 BCE estimate, considering that the time that Moses negotiated with Pharaoh and that Jephthah provided us with a rounded number of 300 years. Now here are some intriguing questions around the consensual date theory. Who was the Pharaoh that died while Moses was in exile as mentioned in Exodus 2:23? Who was the Pharaoh that died during the Exodus as mentioned in Psalms 136:15, Exodus 14:4, 17-18, and 26-28? So in contrast to the argument of Donald Redford in the book Egypt, Canaan, and Israel in Ancient Times, where he said, the biblical writer certainly thinks he is writing datable history. We can certainly assert that the writer of the biblical narrative does not only think, but he or she certainly knows that he is writing a datable history. And the fact that it is datable, it supports the biblical Exodus narrative. Now, what about our take on the cultural context theory of Manfred Bitech? Bitech's study is truly fascinating. Not only is he highly credible to give insights as he has excavated Avaris himself, but his insights are also quite noteworthy and fascinating. In his study, we saw more of the archaeological, geographical, and cultural insights that indeed the people who later became the Israelites who eventually settled in Israel once settled and left willingly due to oppression the northeastern delta of Egypt. These proto-Israelites left their marks in Egypt through the architectures of four-room houses and altars and carried this with them along with their other cultures to the land that God had promised them. Bitech's theories of the proto-Israelites that settled and left Egypt has elements that are historically verifiable, especially in regards to historical geography. For me, such theory certainly supports the biblical narrative of the Exodus. Now, what about the theories of the Exodus? Explaining the Exodus using scientific and naturalistic explanation downplays the glorious ground of the omnipotent God's miraculous work. For my final word on the theories, though such theories and studies are certainly fascinating and imagination-sparking idea, it makes the biblical narrative too sensationalized and are therefore irrelevant. In the words of J.M. Roberts, final judgment is at present difficult or perhaps impossible. What is my take on the situation? Now, I dig not to find a reason to have faith, but I dig to prove that my faith is further supported by academic reasoning. Evidence does not precede true faith. If evidence came before faith, then that isn't true faith, rather a requirement to believe. When you require evidence, it does not show how much faith you have, but rather how much you doubt. For me, the Exodus happened whether or not there are evidence to support it. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Archaeological and Egyptological records are inconclusive and non-exhaustive. Given the nature of the events of the Exodus that many people might expect, my faith does not require external validation. But for someone who needs external evidence, the Egyptological record certainly seems lacking in any definitive answers. It seems that you may carve out a space for an Exodus event. But this is not the case where the Egyptological, archaeological, and historical records clearly and unequivocally corroborate the biblical narrative.